Welcome to the first episode of my brand new series, Audiblore on Mandalore. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, this is Wednesday, 7 p.m. AEDT. There is no way you have not done Blades and Beskar. Well, I actually wanted to do my very first book as the Simarillion. Now, the Simarillion is a book that was recommended to me by Phidias McCormick. I am so grateful for all of the recommendations that you guys have been giving me, but this one had to be the top of the list. This is the first age of Middle-earth. It's a history of recounting multiple different stories, an accumulation of different fictional texts that Tolkien used in order to create the world of Middle-earth. The fantastical world of The Hobbit and Middle-earth could not be without this book right here. Now, this was published by his son, Christopher Tolkien. So it's not necessarily Tolkien's work himself, but it is an accumulation of his work that Christopher has put in there that I will read just for you shortly about the transcribed text that he put in just to preface the whole book. But I'm doing this on a brand new camera. I've got a DJI Osmo Pocket 3. It is one that can track every single movement that I do. I can be all the way up here, back, down here, moving along, and it will track me wherever I go. So, for all of you guys who are ready to sit down, listen to a book, I will tell you, I apologize. I apologize mainly because I'm going to get a lot of things wrong. I'm going to mispronounce. I'm going to say a few things that just don't make sense, but I'm working on this with you. I want to hear feedback. What do you guys think? How do you guys like it? Do you like the backdrop? What's going on? Tell me. This is meant to be a collaborative series, working with you guys. Now, what I want to do today is I just want to cover the letter from Tolkien in this book, and then I want to cover the first chapter. We'll see how we go with time, but I don't want to extend this too long. In the end, what I want to do is I want to read through the chapters and then break it down for you in a separate text. Today is going to be a little bit different because the first chapter is a bit of an introduction into the world. It's a bit of a history lesson. We don't need to go into too much because it's transcribed everywhere. But as we hear the stories, we'll talk about them, we'll break them down, and that will be the future of Blades and Beskar, comparing that to potential stories in Star Wars. So, let's sit back, let's relax, grab yourself a beer, a tea, milk, whatever you want to get, cheese and crackers in it, and sit back and listen to me horribly recount this amazing book. So, let's start off with the forewords. The Simarillion is an account of the elder days, or the first age of Tolkien's world. It is the ancient drama to which the characters in Lord of the Rings look back, and in whose events some of them, such as Elrond and Galadriel, took part. The tales of the Simarillion are set in an age when Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, dwelt in Middle-earth, and the High Elves made war upon him for the recovery of the Silmarils. The three Silmarils were jewels created by Fëanor, the most gifted of the elves. Within them were imprisoned the light of the two trees of Valinor, before the trees themselves were destroyed by Morgoth. Thereafter, the unsullied light of Valinor lived on only in the Silmarils, but they were seized by Morgoth and set in his crown, guarded in the fortress of Angband in the north of Middle-earth. The Simarillion is the history of the rebellion of Fëanor and his kindred against the gods, their exile from Valinor, and the return to Middle-earth, and their war, hopeless despite their heroism, against the great enemy. Included in the book are several shorter works. The Annuldale is a myth of the creation of the Valaquenta. The nature and powers of each of the gods is described. The Alcabeth, or the Akallabeth, recounts the downfall of the great island kingdom of Númenor at the end of the Second Age, and of the Rings of Power, tells the great events of the end of the Third Age, which are narrated in The Lord of the Rings. A little bit of a shout out to this writing here. This is beautiful. So there is an extra foreword here by Christopher Tolkien, which I won't go into. It's talking about the exact same thing that was summarized just previously. But what I have here is a letter from J.R.R. Tolkien to Milton Waldman in 1951. My dear Milton, you asked for a brief sketch of my stuff that is connected with my imaginary worlds. It is difficult to say anything without saying too much. The attempt to say a few words opens a floodgate of excitement. The egoist and artist at once desires to say how the stuff has grown, what it is like, and what he thinks, or he means, or is trying to represent by it all. I shall inflict some of these on you, but I will append a mere resume of its contents, which is, maybe, all that you want or will have use or time for. In order of time, growth, and composition, this stuff began with me, though I do not suppose that is of much interest to anyone but myself. I mean, I do not remember a time when I was not building it. Many children make up or begin to make up imaginary languages. I have been at it since I could write, but I have never stopped. And of course, as a professional philologist, especially interested in linguistic aesthetics, I have changed in taste, improved in theory, and probably in craft. Behind my stories is now a nexus of languages, mostly of structural sketched. But to those creatures which in English I call misleadingly elves, are assigned two related languages more nearly completed, whose history is written, and whose forms, representing two different sides of my own linguistic taste, are deducted scientifically from a common origin. Out of these languages are made nearly all the names that appear in my legends. This gives a certain character, a cohesion, a consistency of linguistic style, and an illusion of historicity to the nomenclatures, or so I believe, that is markedly lacking in other comparable things. Not all will feel this is as important as I do, since I am cursed by acute sensibility in such matters. But an equally basic passion of mine, ab initio, was a myth, not allegory, and for fairy story, and above all, for heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history, of which there is far too little in the world for my appetite. I was an undergraduate before thought and experience revealed to me that these were not divergent interests, opposite poles of science and romance, but integrally related. I am not learned in the matters of myth and fairy story. However, for in such things, as far known to me, I have always been seeking material, things of certain tone and air, and not simple knowledge. Also, here I hope I shall not sound absurd. I was from early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought, and found as an ingredient in the legends of other lands. There was Greek and Celtic and Romance and Germanic, Scandinavian and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English, save impoverished chapbook stuff. Of course, there was and is always the Arthurian world, but powerful as it is imperfectly naturalized and associated with the soil of Britain, but not with English, and does not replace what I felt to be missing. For one thing, its fairy is too lavish, fantastical, incoherent, and repetitive. For another and more important thing, it is involved in and explicitly contains the Christian religion. You guys can hear that, that's a kookaburra. It's pretty beautiful. For reasons which I will not elaborate, that seems to me fatal. Myth and fairy story must, as all art, reflect and contain in solution elements of moral and religious truths or error, but not explicit, not in the known form of the primary real world. I am speaking, of course, of our present situation, not of ancient pagan pre-Christian days, and I will not repeat what I tried to say in my essay, which you read. Do not laugh, but once upon a time my crest has long since fallen. I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmotic to the legend of romantic fairy story, the larger founded on, the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendour from the vast backlots, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, be redolent and out of air. The clime and soil of the northwest, meaning Britain and the hither parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less than the east, and while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in genuine ancient Celtic things. It should be high, purged of the gross, and fit for more adult mind, of a land long now steeped in poetry. I would draw some things the great tales in fullness, and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycle should be linked to a majestic whole, yet leave scope for the other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd, of course. Such an overweening purpose did not develop all at once. The mere stories were a thing. They arose in my mind as given things, and as they came separately too, the links grew. And absorbing through continually interrupted labour, especially since even were apart from the necessities of life, the mind would wing to the other pole and spend itself on its linguistics. That's a horsefly. That bit me really fucking hard. Apologies, I have lost my place. I'm just going to go from here. The mere stories were the thing. They arose in my mind as given things, and as they came separately, so the links grew, and absorbing through continually interrupted labour, especially since, even apart from the necessities of life, the mind would wing to the other pole and spend itself on the linguistics. Yet always I had the sense of recording what was already there, somewhere, not of inventing. Of course I made up and even wrote lots of other things, especially for my children. Some escaped from the grasp of this branching acoustic theme, being ultimately radical and unrelated. Leaf by Niggle, Farmer Giles, for instance, the only two that have been printed. The Hobbit, which has much more essential life in it, was quite independently conceived. I did not know as I began that it belonged, but it proved to be the discovery of the completion of the whole, its mode of the descent of the earth merging into history, as the high legends of the beginnings are supposed to look at the things through elvish minds. So the middle tale of the Hobbit takes a virtually human point of view, and the last tale blends them. I dislike allegory, the conscious and intentional allegory, yet any attempt to explain the purpose of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language. And of course, the more life a story has, the more readily will it be susceptible to allegorical interpretations. While the better a deliberate allegory is made, the more nearly it will be acceptable just as a story. Anyway, all of this stuff is mainly concerned with fall, mortality, and the machine. With fall, inevitably, and motive occurs in several modes, with mortality especially as it affects art and the creative, subcreative desire, which seems to have no biological function, and to be apart from the satisfactions of plain ordinary biological life, with which, in our world, is indeed usually at strife. This desire is at once wedded to a passionate love of the real primary world, and hence filled with the sense of mortality, and yet unsatisfied by it, it has various opportunities of fall. It may become possessive, clinging to the things made of its own. The sub-creator wishes to be the lord and the god of its private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the Creator, especially against mortality. Both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power, for making the will more quickly effective, and so to the machine or magic. By the last, I intend to use all of the external plans or devices instead of developments or the inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized. I have not used magic consistently, and indeed with the elven queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy, and for those of the elves. I have not, because there is no word for the latter, since all human stories have suffered in the same confusion, but the elves are there in my tales to demonstrate the difference. Their magic is art, derived from the many of the human limitations, more effortless and more quick, more complete product, and vision is unflawed correspondence, and its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. The elves are immortal, at least as far as the world goes, and hence are concerned rather with the griefs and burdens of deathlessness in time and change than with death. The enemy in successive forms is always naturally concerned with the sheer domination, and so the Lord of Magic and Machines. But the problem, that this frightful evil can and does arise from an apparent good root, the desire to benefit the world and others, speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans. It is recurrent motive. The cycles begin with a cosmogonical myth, the music of Anu, god of the Valar, or powers, Englished as gods, are revealed. These latter are known as, we should say, angelic powers, whose function is to exercise delegated authority in their spheres of rule and government, not creation, making or remaking. They are divine, that is, were originally outside the existed, before, and making of the worlds. Their power and wisdom is derived from the knowledge of the cosmogonical drama, which they perceived first as drama, that is, in a fashion we perceive a story composed by someone else, and later as a reality. On the side of mere narrative device, this is, of course, meant to provide things of the same order of beauty, power, and majesty of the gods, or higher mythology, which can be accepted, well, shall we say, boldly, by the mind that believes in the Blessed Trinity. It moves then swiftly to the history of the elves, or the Simarillion proper, to the world as we perceive it. To the world as we perceive it, but of course transfigured into still half mythical mode. That is, deals with the rational incarnate creatures of more or less comparable stature with our own. The knowledge of the creation drama was incomplete in each individual god, and incomplete if all the knowledge of the pantheon were pooled, for, partly to redress the evil and rebel Melkor, partly for the completion. Beautiful to be got it from. Partly for the completion of all, in ultimate finesse to detail, the Creator had not revealed all. The making and nature of the children of God were the two chief secrets. All the gods knew was they would come in appointed time. The children of God are thus primevally related and akin, and primevally different. Since also they are something holy, other to God, in the making of which the gods played no part. They are object of the first special desire and love of the gods. These are the firstborn, the elves, and the followers, men. The doom of the elves is to be immortal. The love, the beauty of the world, to bring in to bring it to full flower with their gifts of delicacy and perfection, to last while it lasts, never leaving it when slain but returning. And yet, when the followers come to teach them and make way for them, to fade as the followers grow, and absorb the life from which both proceed. The doom, or the gift, of men is mortality, freedom from the circles of the world. Since the point of view of the whole cycle is that elvish mortality is not explained mythically. It is a mystery of God of which no more is known, and that God has purpose for men is hidden. A grief and an envy to the immortal elves. As I say, the legendary Simarillion is peculiar and differs from all similar things that I know, and is not being anthropocentric. Its center of view and interest is not men but elves. Men come in inevitability. After all, the author is a man, and if he has an audience, they will be men, and men must come in our tales. As such, and not merely transfigured or partially represented as elves, Saw, Hobbit, etc., but they remain peripheral, latecomers, and however growingly important, not principal. In the cosmogony, there is a fall of angels, we should say, though quite different in form, of course, to that of Christian myth. These tales are new. They are not directly derived from myths and legends, but they must inevitably contain a large measure of ancient widespread motives or elements. After all, I believe that the legends and myths are largely made of truth, and indeed present aspects of it that can only be retrieved or received in this mode. Long ago, certain truths and modes of this kind were discovered and must always reappear. There cannot be any story without a fall. All stories are ultimately about the fall, at least not for human minds. So, we know them and have them. So proceeding, the elves have a fall, before their history can become story. The first fall of man, for reasons explained, nowhere appears. Men do not come on the stage until all that is long past, and there is only rumour. For a while, they fell under the domination of the enemy, and that some still pent for them. The main body of the tale, the Simarillion that I got, is about the fall of the most gifted kindred of the elves, their exile from Valinor, the kind of paradise, the home of the gods. In the furthest west, their re-entry into Middle-earth and the land of their birth, but long after the rule of the enemy, in their strife with them, the power of evil still visibly incarnate. It receives its name because the events are threaded upon the fate and significance of the Simarilli, radiance of pure light, or primeval jewel. By the making of the gems, the sub-creative functions of the elves is chiefly symbolized, but the Simarilli were more than just beautiful things as such. There was light. There was the light of Valinor, made visible in the two trees of silver and gold. These were slain by the enemy out of malice, and Valinor was darkened. Though from them, ere they died utterly, were derived from the light of sun and moon. A marked difference here between these legends and most others is that the sun is not a divine symbol, but a second best thing, and the light of the sun, the world under the sun, becomes terms for a fallen world, and a dislocated, imperfect vision. But the chief artificer of the elves, Fëanor, has imprisoned the light of the Valinor in three supreme jewels, the Simarilli. Before the trees were sullied or slain, this light thus lives therefore only in these gems. The fall of the elves comes about to the possessive attitude of Fëanor and his 7 sons of the gems. They are captured by the enemy, set in his iron crown, and guarded in his impenetrable stronghold. The sons of Fëanor take a terrible and blasphemous oath and vengeance against her or any, even unaffected gods, who dared to find any part right over secret work. They pervert the greater part of their guilt. He will rebel against them and depart from paradise and go to make hopeless wars for the enemy. The first fruit of their fall is war in paradise, the slaying of elves by elves, and this their evil oath dogs for their later heroism, generating treacheries and undoing all victories. The Simarillion is the history of the war of the exiled elves against the enemy, which all takes place in the northwest of the world, Middle-earth. Several tales of victory and tragedy are caught up in it, but it ends with catastrophe and the passing of the ancient world. The world of the long first age. The jewels are recovered by the final intervention of the gods, only to be lost forever to the elves. One in the sea, one in the deeps of earth, and one as a star of heaven. This legendarium ends up with the vision of the end of the world, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Simarillion and the light before the sun. After a final battle which owes, I suppose, more to the Norse vision of Ragnarok than to anything else, though it is not much like it. As stories become less mystical and more stories and romances, men are interwoven. For the most part of these are good men, family and their chiefs, who, rejecting the service of the people and fearing rumors of the gods of the West and the High Elves, flee westward and come up into contact with the exiled elves in the midst of their duel. The men who appear are mainly those of the three houses of the fathers they command, whose chieftains become allies of the elf lords for them. The contact of men and elves already foreshadows the history of the later ages, and a recurrent theme is the idea that in men, as they now are, there is a strand of blood and inheritance, derived from the elves, and the art and poetry of men is largely dependent on it, or modified by it. There are thus two marriages of mortal and elf, both later coalescing in the kindred of Erenadil, represented by Elrond and half-elven who appear, the half-elven who appears in the stories, even The Hobbit. The chief of the stories of the Simarillion, and the one most fully true, is the story of Beren and Luthien, the Elf Maiden. Here we meet, among other things, the first example of the motive to become dominant in Hobbit, that the great policies of the world, the wheels of the world, are often turned out by the lords and governors, even gods, but the most seemingly unknown and weak, owning to the secret life in creation and part unknowable to the wisdom of one, to the wisdom but one, that resides in the intrusions of the children of the god into the drama. It is Beren, the outlawed mortal, who succeeds with the help of Luthien, a mere maiden, even if an elf of royalty. Where all the armies and warriors have failed, he penetrates the stronghold of the enemy and wrests one of the Simarilli from the crown. And thus he wins the hand of Luthien, and the first marriage of mortal and immortal is achieved. As such, the story is, I think, a beautiful and powerful heroic fairy romance, receivable in itself with only a very general vague knowledge of the background, but is also a fundamental link to the cycle, deprived of its full significance. Out of place of Theron, for the capture of the Silmaril, a supreme victory leads to disaster. The oath of the sons of Fëanor becomes operative, and the lust for the Silmaril brings all of the kingdoms of the elves to ruin. There are other stories almost equally full in treat and equally independent, and yet linked to the general history. There is the Children of Hurin, the tragic tale of Turin Tumbar and his sister Niniel, of which Turin is the hero, a figure that might be said by people who like that sort of thing, though it is not very useful, to be derived from elements in Sigurd the Volsung, AUDIBLOOREONMANDALORE, and the Finnish Kalevala. There is a fall of Gondolin, that chief Elvish stronghold, and the tales of Erendil, the Wanderer. He is important as a person who brings the Simarillion to its end, and as providing in his offspring the main links to and persons in tales of later ages. His function and representative of the both kindreds, elves and men, is to find a sea passage back to the land of gods, and as ambassador persuade them to take through again for the exiles, to pity them and rescue them from the enemy. His wife Elwing descends from the Lucian and still possesses the Simurl, but the curse still works. The Erendil's home is destroyed by the sons of Feanor, but this provides the solution. Elwing, casting herself into the sea to save the jewel, comes to Erendil, and with the power of the great gem, they pass at last to Valinor and accomplish their errand, at the cost of never being allowed to return or dwell again with elves and Handed. The gods then move again. The great power comes from the west, and the stronghold of the enemy is destroyed, and he himself is thrust out of the world to the void, never to reappear there and Khan of Selm again. The remaining two Simarils are renamed by Trow, only to be lost. The last two sons of Feanor, compelled by their oath, steal them and are destroyed by them, casting themselves into the sea and to the pits of earth. The ship of Erendil, adorned with the last Simaril, is set in heaven as the brightest star. So ends the Simarillion and the tales of the First Age. The next cycle deals with, or would deal, with the Second Age. But it is on Earth a dark age, and not very much history need be told. In the great battles against the first enemy, the lands were broken and ruined, and in the west, Middle-earth becomes desolate. We learn that the exiled elves were, if not commanded, at least sternly counselled to return to the west, and there be at peace. They were not to dwell permanently in Valinor again, but in a lonely isle of Erethi, which within sight of the Blessed Realm. The men of the three houses were rewarded for the valor and faithful alliance by being allowed to dwell westernmost of all mortals, in the great Atlantis Isle of Numenor. The doom or gift of God of mortality, the gods of course cannot abrogate, but the Numenorians have a great span of life. They set sail and leave Middle-earth and establish a great kingdom of mariners just within the furthest sight of Erisea, but not of Valinor. Most of the High Elves depart also back into the west. Not all. Some men akin to the Numenorians remain in the lands not far from the shores of the sea. Some of the exiles will not return or delay their return, for the way west is ever open to the immortals, and in Greyhaven ships are ever ready to sail away forever. Also the orcs, goblins, and other monsters bred by the first enemy are not wholly destroyed. And there is Sauron. In the Simarillion and Tales of the First Age, Sauron was a being part of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy, becoming his chief captain and servant. He repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, and in the end does not do as was commanded. Return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth, very slowly beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth, neglected by the gods. He becomes a reincarnation of evil, and a thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed evermore by the fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. Through the twilight of the Second Age of the Shadow growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men, who multiply as the elves begin to fade. The three main things are thus delaying elves that lingered in Middle-earth. Sauron's growth to a new Dark Lord, master of the god and god of men, and Numenor Atlantis. They are dealt with analytically and in two tales or accounts, The Rings of Power and The Downfall of Numenor. Both are essential backgrounds of The Hobbit and its sequel. In the first, we see the sort of second fall, or at least error, of the elves. There was nothing wrong, essentially, with their lingering against council, still sadly with mortal lands of their old heroic deeds. But they wanted to have their cake without eating it. They wanted the peace and bliss and perfect memory of the West. And yet, to remain on the ordinary earth, where their prestige as the highest people above wild elves, dwarves, and men was greater than the bottom of the hierarchy of Valinor. They thus become obsessed with the fading, the mode in which the changes of time, the laws, the world under the sun, was perceived by them. They became sad, and their art, shall we say, antiquarian, and their efforts all really a kind of embalming, even though they also retain the old motive of their kind, the adornment of earth and the healing of its hurt. We hear the lingering kingdom in the extreme northwest, more or less in what was left in the old lands of the Simarillion under Gil-galad, and of other settlements such as Inwarders, or Rivendell, near Elrond, and Great One at Eregion, at the western feet of the Misty Mountains, adjacent to the mines of Valyria, the major realm of the dwarves in the Second Adam. There arose a friendship between the usually hostile elves and dwarves. For the first time, Swiftcraft reached its highest level, but many of the elves listened to Sauron. He was still fair in that early time, and his motives and those of the elves seemed to go partly together. The healing of the desolate lands. Sauron found their weak point and suggested that helping one another, they could make Western Middle-earth as beautiful as Valinor. It was really a veiled attack on the gods, an incitement to try and make a separate independent paradise. Gil-galad repulsed such overtures, as also did Elrond. But at Eregion, great work began, and the elves came their nearest to falling to magic and machinery. With the aid of Sauron's law, they made rings of power. Power is an ominous and sinister word in all of these tales, except as applied to the gods. The chief power of all rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay, i.e., change, viewed as the regrettable thing. The preservation of what is desired or loved, or its resemblance. It is more or less an elvish motive. But also they enhance the natural powers of the possessor, thus approaching magic, a motive easily corruptible into evil, a lust for domination. And finally, they had other powers, more directly derived from Sauron, the necromancer, so he is called as he casts fleeting a shadow and prestige on the pages of The Hobbit, such as rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. The elves of Eregion made 3 supremely beautiful and powerful rings, almost solely out of their own imagination, and directed to the preservation of beauty. They did not confer invisibility, but secretly in the subterranean fire, in his own black lamp, Sauron made one ring, the ruling ring that contained the powers of all others, and controlled them, so that the wearer could see all the thoughts of those that used the lesser ringlet, could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. He reckoned, however, without the wisdom, the subtle perception of the elves, the moment he assumes the one, they were aware of it, and of his secret purpose they were afraid. They hid the 3 rings so that not even Sauron ever discovered where they were, and remained unsullied. The others they tried to destroy. In the resulting war between Sauron and the elves Middle-earth, especially in the west, was further ruined. Eregion was captured and destroyed, and Sauron seized many rings of power. These he gave for their ultimate corruption and enslavement, to those who would accept them, out of ambition or greed. Hence the ancient rhyme that appears as the leitmotif of Lord of the Rings. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarven lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Sauron became thus almost supreme in Middle-earth. The elves held out in secret places, not yet revealed. The last elf kingdom of Gil-galad is maintained precariously on the extreme west shores, where are all havens of the ships. Elrond, the half-elven son of Erendil, maintains a kind of enchanted sanctuary of Imladris, or Rivendell, on the extreme eastern margin of the western land. But Sauron dominates all of the multiplying hordes of men that have no contact with the elves, and so indirectly with the true and unfallen Valar and gods. He rules a growing empire from the great dark tower of Barad-dûr in Mordor, and to the mountain of fire, wielding the One Ring. But to achieve this, he had been obligated to let a great part of his own inherent power, a frequent and very significant motive in myth and fairy story, pass on to the One Ring. While he wore it, his power on Earth was actually enhanced. But even if he did not wear it, that power existed and was in rapport with himself. He was not diminished, unless some other seized it and became possessed of it. If that happened, a new possessor could, if sufficiently strong and heroic by nature, challenge Sauron, become master of all that he had learned or done since the making of the One Ring, and so overthrow him and usurp his place. This was the essential weakness that he had introduced into this situation. His effort, largely unsuccessful, to enslave the elves. And in his desire to establish control over the minds and wills of his servants, there was another weakness. If the One Ring was actually unmaimed, annihilated all, then its power would be dissolved. Sauron's own being would be diminished to a vanishing point, and he would be reduced to shadow, a mere memory of the malicious work. But that he never contemplated nor feared. The ring was unbreakable by any smithcraft less of his own. It was undissolvable in any fire, save the undying subterranean fire, which it was made. And that was unapproachable in Mordor. Also, so great was the ring's power of lust, that anyone who used it became mastered by it. It was beyond the strength of any will, even his own, to injure it, cast it away, or neglect it. So he thought it was in any case on his finger. Thus, as the Second Age draws on, we have a great kingdom, an evil theocracy. The Sauron is also a god of his slaves. Growing up in Middle-earth. In the west, actually the northwest, is the only part clearly envisaged in these tales, lie the precarious refuges of the elves, while men in these parts remain more or less uncorrupted, if ignorant. The better and nobler sort of men are in fact the kin of those who have departed to Numenor, but remain in a simple Homeric state, patriarchal and tribal life, descended from Elros, Erendil's son, brother of Elwar. The downfall of Numenor, the second fall of man, or the man rehabilitated, but still mortal, brings on the catastrophic end, not only of the Second Age, but of the old world, the primeval world of legend, envisioned as a flat and bounded, after which the Third Age began, a twilight age, a medium of Im, the first of the broken and changing world, the last of the lingering dominion of visible, fully incarnate elves, and the last of which evil assumed the symbol's dominant incarnate shape. The downfall is partly the result of the inner weakness of men, consequent, if you will, upon the first fall, unrecorded in these tales, repented but only finally healed. The reward on earth is more dangerous for men than punishment. The fall is achieved by the cunning of Sauron, by exploiting this weakness. Its central theme is inevitably, I think, in a story of man, a ban, or prohibition. Númenóreans dwell within far sight of the easternmost immortal land, Erisea, and as the only men to speak an elvish tongue, learned in the days of their alliance, they are in consistent communication with their ancient friends and allies, either in the bliss of Erisea or in the kingdom of Gil-galad on the shores of Middle-earth. They became thus in appearance, and even in those powers of mind, hardly distinguishable from elves. But they remained mortal, even though rewarded by triple, or more than a triple, span of years. Their reward is their undoing, or the means of their temptation. Their long life aids their achievements in art and wisdom, but breeds a possessive attitude to these things, and desire awakes for more time for their enjoyment. Foreseeing this in part, the gods laid a ban on the Númenóreans from the beginning. They must never sail to Erisea, nor westward out of sight of their own land. In all other directions they could go as they would. They would not set foot on immortal lands and so become immersed of immortality in a world which was against their law, the special dermot and gift of the Iluvatar gods, and which their nature could not, in fact, endure. There are three phases in fortune grace. First, acquiescence, obedience that is free and willing, though without complete understanding. Then for long they obey the unwilling, murmuring more and open. Finally they rebel, and a rift appears between the king's men and rebels, and the small minority of persecuted faith. In the first stage, being men of peace, their courage is devoted to sea voyages. As descendants of Erenadil, they became the supreme mariners, and being barred from the west, they sailed to the utmost north and south and east. Mostly, they come to the west shores of Middle-earth, where they aid the elves and men against Sauron, and incur his undying hatred. In those days when they would come amongst wild men as almost divine benefactors, bringing gifts of arts and knowledge and passing away again, leaving many legends behind of kings and gods out of the sunset. In the second stage, the days of pride and glory and grudging of the ban, they begin to seek wealth rather than bliss. The desire to escape death produced the cult of the dead. They lavish wealth and art on Simarillion. They now made a settlement of the west shores, but these became rather strongholds and factories of lords seeking wealth. And the Númenóreans became tax gatherers, carrying off overseas and even more and more in their great ships. The Númenóreans began the forging of arms and engines. This phase ended, and the last began with the ascent to the throne of the 13th king of the line of Elros, Simarillion the Golden, the most powerful and proud of all kings. When he learned that Sauron had taken the title of King of Kings and Lord of the world, he resolved to put down the pretender. He goes in strength and majesty to Middle-earth, and so vast in his armament, and so terrible are the Númenóreans in his day of their glory, that Sauron's servants will not face them. Sauron humbles himself, does not homage to Simarillion, and is carried off to Númenor as hostage in Vredna. But there he swiftly rises to by his cunning and knowledge of the servant and chief counselor of the king, and seduces the king and most of the lords and people with his lies. He denies the existence of God, saying that one is mere invention of the jealous Valar of the West, the oracle of their own weakness. The chief of the gods is that he dwells in the void, who will conquer in the world, and in the void make endless realms for his servants. The ban is only a lying device of fear to restrain the tunes of men in seizing everlasting life and rivaling the Valar. A new religion and worship of the dark, with its temple under Sauron, arises. The faithful are persecuted and sacrificed. The Númenóreans carry their evil across to Middle-earth, and they become cruel and wicked lords of necromancy, slaying and tormenting men, and the old legends are overlaid with dark tales of horror. But this does not happen, however, in the Northwest. For further, because of the elves, only the faithful who remain elf-friends will come. The chief haven of the good Númenóreans is near the mouth of the great river Anduin. Hence, the still beneficent influence of Númenor spreads up the river and along the coast as far north as the realm of Gil-galad, as the common speech blows up. But at last Sauron's plot comes to fulfillment. Tar-Kalian feels old age and death approaching, and he listens to the last prompting of Sauron and building of the greatest of all armadas. He sets sail onto the west, breaking the ban and going up with war to rest from the gods' everlasting life within the surface of the void of the world. Faced by this rebellion of appalling folly and blasphemy, and also real peril, since the Númenóreans directed by Sauron could have wrought ruin in Valinor itself, the Valar lay down their delegated power and appeal to God. The Valar lay down their delegated power and appeal to God, and receive the power and permission to deal with the situation. The old world is broken and changed. A chasm is open in the sea, and Tar-Kalian and his armada is engulfed. Númenor itself is on the edge of the rift, topples and vanishes forever with its glory into the abyss. Thereafter, there is no visible dwelling of the divine and immortal on earth, Valinor, or paradise, and even Erised are removed, remaining only in the memory of the earth. Men may sail now west, if they will, as far as they may, and come no nearer to Valinor or the blessed realm, but return only to the east, and so back again. For the world is round and infinite, and the circle inescapable, save by death. Only the immortals, the lingering elves, may still if they will, wearing the weight of the circle of the world, take ship and find the straight way, and come to the ancient or true west to be at peace. So to the end of the Second Age draws into the major catastrophe, but is not yet quite concluded. From the cataclysm there are survivors. Elendil the Fair, chief of the faithful, his name means elf friend, and his sons Isildur and Aranian. Elendil, a Noachian figure, who had held on from the rebellion, and he kept ships manned and found the sea coast of the east coast route, flees before the overwhelming storm of the wrath to well, and is borne high upon the towering waves that bring ruin to the wasteland of Middle-earth. He and his folks are cast away as exiles upon the shore. There are established the Númenor kingdoms in the north, close to the realm of Gil-galad and Gondor, about the mouths of Anduin further south. Sauron, being an immortal, hardly escapes the ruin of Númenor and returns to Mordor, whereafter he is strong enough to challenge the exiles of Númenor. The Second Age ends with the last alliance of elves and men, and the great siege of Mordor. It ends with the overthrow of Sauron and the destruction of the second visible incarnation of evil, but at a cost, with the one disastrous mistake. Gil-galad and Elendil are slain in the act of slaying Sauron. Isildur, Elendil's son, cuts the ring from Sauron's hand, and his power departs, and his spirit flees into the shadows. But the evil begins to work. Isildur claims the ring as his own, as the were-guild of his father, and refuses to cast it into the fire nearby. He marches away, but is drowned in the great river, and the ring is lost, passing out of all knowledge. But it is not unmade, The dark tower built with its aid still stands, empty but not destroyed. So ends the second age with the coming of the Numenorian realms and the passing of the last kingship of the High Elves. So I'm gonna call that one there. I did not know that was going to be so long. That was like that much of the book. That's insane. I really enjoyed that. I'm so sorry for making so many mistakes. That was crazy. I loved it. I hope you guys did as well. Look, I mean, that was like the whole recounting of everything that happened in all the time in Middle-earth. I think it sets it up really well. And I hope that you guys join me for my next one. I hope you guys see what becomes of this. I hope I can learn a lot more. See, the thing is, if you see it even later, it's so much easier to read it. That was a hectic letter. So, you know what? I'm hopeful. I reckon I can do it. I believe in myself. I believe in you. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all watch my next ones. I'm probably going to do this on Tuesday. I've also got Heir to the Empire coming up, which is going to be much easier to read. This is like jumping into the fucking deep end of the pool. I love you all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao, ciao. Oh.